I've chosen to do my presentation on the topic of digital etiquette because I feel like it's a topic that is greatly overlooked sometimes. With the rise in the amount of texting, people have gotten lazier with their interactions and emails to coworkers and teachers. With the rise in the amount of children on social media, there has also been a rise in the amount of cyberbullying. This has led children to harm themselves or even commit suicide, and for some reason, children aren't realizing that their actions have consequences even though they're not face to face with someone. I found some articles that I think will help me incorporate digital etiquette into my lesson plans, and I hope they help you as well. The first article I found was written by Jessica Barnes, who defines digital etiquette as the standards of conduct expected by other digital technology users. She talks about the fact that children are still being taught to treat others the way they would like to be treated from a young age, but that they're having problems transitioning this into the digital world. She thinks that part of our problem as teachers and parents could be that we were not raised with technology, so we didn't learn these rules later in life. She also says that most of the rules for digital etiquette are common sense, but that they still need to be reinforced, and children need to be taught that sarcasm and jokes don't transfer well over text, and they can be misconstrued, and people can get their feelings hurt very easily. They need to be taught that cyberbullying has real effects even though it's not happening face to face, and that the damage is lasting and real. She also points out that most schools have an acceptable use policy that clearly states the guidelines and the consequences that will happen if these guidelines are broken while using the internet on school grounds. The second article I found was written by Michael Boese, who says that it's a good idea to start children on social networking when there is an adult around at school or at home. He says that children feel this need to friend everyone that requests them and like every page their friends like, and having an adult around to navigate these situations could be useful. He also says that having an adult around is useful if children happen to offend someone or upset someone inadvertently. They'll need help to correct these situations. He also points out that creating boundaries and making your child feel like their social network is theirs is important as well. Don't go around friending their friends. Don't friend their teachers. Make sure they aren't friending their teachers. But always keep an eye on them and keep an eye on what they're doing. The next source I found is actually an excerpt from a book written by Virginia Shea called The Core Rules of Netiquette, which is just another word for digital etiquette. Shea's first rule is remember the human. She wants us to ask ourselves if we would say this to the person's face. She also wants us to remember that if we say something mean, it can always come back to haunt us because words online last forever. Her second rule is adhere to the same standards of behavior online that you follow in real life. With this one, she wants us to remember to always be ethical, and if something is illegal in real life, then it's probably still illegal online. Just because you're doing something online doesn't mean you can't get caught and you aren't completely anonymous. Shea's third rule is to know where you are in cyberspace. She urges us to look around through forums before we comment to get a feel of how people speak to each other there, and basically to lurk before you speak. Her third rule is respect other people's time and bandwidth. With this rule, she wants us to remember to only include people in emails that need to be included, to think about what you're posting and whether you actually need to say it or not, and to respect other people's bandwidth by not sending repetitive posts or messages that just take up someone's space unnecessarily. Rule number 5 is make yourself look good online. Because people aren't looking at you face to face, you aren't being judged on the way you look or the color of your skin, so she wants us to remember to use proper grammar and spelling, to know what you're talking about, and to make sense, and don't be confrontational just for the sake of it. Rule number 6 is share expert knowledge. If you go through a forum and you see that someone has a question, don't be afraid to answer it if you know the correct answer. On the other hand, if you have a question, don't be scared to ask it because the chances are there will be an expert available to help you. Rule number 7 is to help keep flame wars under control. Flaming is what people do when they express a strongly held opinion without holding back any emotions. She asks us to keep flaming to a minimum because it can be fun to read and write, but it gets boring if the conversation never moves forward. Rule number 8 is to respect other people's privacy. You wouldn't go through someone's desk drawers, so why would you go out of your way to go through their emails or documents? Remember that everyone has the same right to privacy as you do. Rule number 9 is don't abuse your power. She wants us to remember that if we are put in a position of power on a website, not to go through other people's private information. Shay's last rule is rule number 10. Be forgiving of other people's mistakes. She wants us to remember that everyone is human and everyone messes up sometimes, and it's not the end of the world. If you have to point out that someone made a mistake, do so politely. The next article I found was written by Signe Whitson, who gives us basically the same rules as Shay did, but also urges us to teach our children to ask themselves how their parents would feel if they were reading the message they were about to send. She also urges us to remind our children that anything they send on the internet can be there forever and that they should expect for it to be. She also wants us to remind our children that the internet is just a privilege and it can and will be taken away if it is used inappropriately. Lastly, I found an article on secureteen.com that tells us to remember to teach children that oversharing can hurt them in the future. Employers like to go through social networking pages to view the sharing habits of potential employees and can use any information that they find on there as an excuse not to hire someone. We need to be drawing boundaries with our children as to when technology can be used and when it needs to be put away, as well as paying attention to how much time children are spending on technology. We need to make sure that they're still being useful members of society and not just sitting around on their phones or tablets. I think the biggest rule to remember while online is to treat others the way that you would like to be treated. Digital etiquette is something that could easily be taught to children as long as everyone works to teach the same rules. I think that the articles in the book that I have found give us some excellent guidelines, and these shouldn't be difficult to incorporate in lesson plans.